Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the wind-blown ruggedness of Admiralty Island off the coast of Alaska. On the south end of the island is Pybus Bay, which is fairly large and open. On the north end of the bay is a small peninsula-like jut of land that pokes out a bit. At this point in the bay, the beach is tangled with fallen trees and stumps, making navigation and vision very difficult. The beach gives way to dense groves of spruce and fir, with alder, willow, and devil's club, obscuring any hope anyone would have vision past a few yards. It is in this dangerous and wild setting that our episode today takes place. On the morning of Monday, April 26, 2004, 39-year-old Scott Newman had led a bear hunting client of his for the past 9 days on a so far fruitless brown bear hunt. His client was a textile manufacturer from Mexico City, whom we will refer to as Juan. With Juan's wife and Scott's nephew, Levi Newman, acting as assistant guide and cook, the hunting trip took on a family-friendly quality to it. Scott was an avid outdoorsman and had been guiding hunts for 17 years. A little over 12 years ago, he started up his own guiding operation and was now doing it for his own business. Field and Stream magazine reported him as a superb guide, and many of his clients agree. For the prior 9 days, the hunters would get up early and wolf down breakfast and coffee and either hit a trail to a nearby ridge or hop in the skiff to look for bears along the edges of the bay. Each day they would glass the hillside from any vantage point they could find, but just weren't seeing a lot of bears. In fact, they had only seen 9 bears to this point, and were becoming a little frustrated with the lack of cooperation they were getting from the bears. They are supposed to be out looking for food to break their winter fast of hibernation, but they were just not there. After passing on a decent bear on the 5th day of the hunt, their prospects were looking bleak. On the 10th and final day of the hunt, they spotted a good brown bear boar toward the middle of the bay on a little peninsula that pokes out a bit. Scott knew that this was the last best chance they would have at bagging a bear, even if it wasn't the giant bruiser they were looking for. He piloted the boat downwind several hundred yards and quietly anchored their skiff and disembarked. Scott decided they would make the final approach on foot, which would give them a better chance to look the bear over and place a shot that would humanely conclude the hunt. As the hunters closed in on the bear, they could see him doing something behind a group of deadfall logs on the beach. They would see his massive head pop up and down, and then one of his legs would poke out of the tangle. Then it would look as if it was moving off a bit, and then it would start all over again. It is possible that the bear was digging for razor clams, which are a large-sized clam species that buries itself on the sandy shores along the sea in the area. Bears love them and spend as much time as needed to dig them out and devour them. Each one goes on average at about 0.63 ounces of meat, which is rich in nutrients and fat, so it is a good food source for bears. Scott kept an eye on the bear as the men navigated the deadfall trees littering the shore. They would have to crawl under some or over others, all while making sure the wind stayed in their favor as they approached the bear. The hunters managed to stalk within 140 yards of the bear before running out of cover. They had no other means to get closer to him and remain hidden, so Scott had Juan set up to shoot on a log, and they began waiting for a good shot on the bear. The fickle winds on the island concerned Scott a bit. He knew they might change at any moment, so after a little while, he decided to try something new. In the tangle of stumps and tree trunks, the bear still managed to stay obscured as the hunters approached. Scott decided a better angle was in order and began crawling on his belly toward the edge of the shoreline. He was hoping to see the bear's position, but what the bear did next would put the entire hunting party at risk. As Scott belly crawled while holding his rifle and binoculars, he glanced back toward Juan and noticed he had his rifle down and wasn't ready to shoot. The bear decided he should investigate this new scent that had swirled into his nostrils as the wind shifted slightly. The boar-brown bear leapt upon the crisscrossed log jam and stared toward the hunters. Juan was so excited by seeing the bear at such close range and presenting such a large portion of his body as a target that he drew down on the bear while it was facing directly toward him. Now, whenever you hunt, your goal should always be a broadside shot. This allows the greatest opportunity for your projectile, whether bullet, arrow, or spear, to slice through as many vital organs as possible. The likelihood of your projectile striking both lungs while the animal is broadside are much higher than if you fire at them while they face you directly. In addition, the likelihood of a bullet breaking down any portion of the bear's shoulders or hips in a front-facing shot are very small, meaning they can still come after you, even if they are mortally wounded. As the bear popped up on top of one of the logs, Juan fired a bullet and hit center mass. The shot he fired was a fatal shot in about 20 minutes, but 20 minutes of time spent with an irate brown bear might be your last 20 minutes of life. Juan fired a total of 3 shots before Scott could tell him to wait until the bear was broadside. When he heard Juan's rifle fire through its entire load, Scott fired a few rounds from his .416 caliber Remington Magnum hunting rifle with its 400 grain bullets. The men watched as the massive bear streaked across the beach and into the nearby brush and disappeared. Just for the record, a .416 is bigger than that kiddie shotgun your grandpa showed you how to shoot sparrows with, the .410. It has a massive bullet which travels at 2,400 feet per second and delivers 5,100 pounds per square inch. Scientists say that brown bear bone is 10 times as dense as human bone, and to keep them from getting to you when you tick one off, you better make sure a few of those important brown bear bones don't work anymore. None of Juan's bullets struck a large bone. After the shooting stopped, Juan and Scott discussed their next steps. Scott's mind was filled with an upcoming hunt in a few days, and this hunt took longer than he had hoped. Since it was the final day of Juan's hunt, Scott thought it best to immediately trail the wounded bear, for no better reason that it was walking off with more lead in its body right now than most men could carry in a backpack. It was now 7 p.m., and darkness would be closing in less than 2 hours. The thought of coming back in the morning to resume tracking the bear, skinning it, and packing the hide out had occurred to Scott. The other option was to check on the blood trail that the bear had left and see if he could get a good sense of how fatal its injuries were. Scott opted for the latter of the 2 options, and the hunters cautiously approached the last point they saw the bear. They could see where the bear's tracks were and where the blood trail started. It was a good blood trail, with a wide path meaning the bear was bleeding from both sides of his body. This was a good sign to Scott, as he knew the bear couldn't possibly keep bleeding like this for very long before it bled out. As they tracked the blood trail, they found a long strip of bear scat alongside the blood and tracks. This is an indication that the bear is in distress, and it is emptying its bowels in a desperate attempt at escape. Scott estimated the bear had taken around 6 bullets fired from both rifles. There was no way this bear could absorb that much punishment and damage and live for very long. Scott followed the blood trail into the brush, alertly circling for a different perspective as he followed. As the blood trail continued, Scott began to grow a bit concerned. The blood trail was ample in amount, but was dark, which means that it is coming from somewhere closer to the gut area, as opposed to the lungs. Blood from the lungs is usually brighter in color and can be frothy in appearance. Scott knew that this was a bad sign and that the bear was likely still alive and very angry. As Scott reviewed the track evidence in front of him, he kept a careful eye on the direction of travel of the tracks, watching for a telltale circle trend in the tracks which can indicate an ambush. Just as he looked back down toward the ground, he caught a faint whiff of bear scent. He heard an ominous twig snap and quickly slipped his safety off on his rifle. As soon as the bear heard the click of Scott's safety, the ground shook with a roar so loud that it could disorient people. He glanced up and saw the bushes whipping and snapping as the bear mowed its way through and toward Scott. Just as the bear emerged from the brush, Scott could see the bear's right paw pulled back and ready to strike. He shouldered his rifle and leaned in to absorb its jolting kick and squeezed the trigger. Scott could see the fur on the bear's chest part from the impact of the bullet. The shot was fired from only 10 feet away, as the bear was facing him straight on and didn't have any significant effect on its advance. Scott quickly worked his bolt action and did what he called short-stroked the action of his rifle. What likely happened was he was in such a hurry to reload another shell that the prior shell didn't eject fully, ramming the new unspent shell into the backside of the spent cartridge. Scott feverishly worked to dislodge the spent shell from his rifle, but the bear was upon him before he could clear the jam. The enraged boar plowed into Scott going full speed, knocking him clean off his feet and onto his back. Scott knew he had to fight back and began kicking the bear repeatedly in the head. He knew he couldn't allow this bear to get a hold of his neck or head, or his life would be over quicker than the bear could toss his head. The bear clamped its jaws onto Scott's left foot, driving his shattered foot bones through the skin. Searing pain forced an eruption of profanity from Scott's mouth that would make a sailor blush. The bear pulled his head back and removed Scott's left boot in the process. Scott shoved the butt of his rifle into the bear's mouth, and it bit down hard. He held his hands to push the bear away, but the snapping jaws of the bear quickly crunched through them. Next it worked its way up his left leg a few inches, crunching bones and tearing tissues the entire time. Scott was still trying to work the action of his rifle, hoping that he could shoot the bear before it was able to do fatal damage to him. Scott knew that damage to his lower legs would be painful, but probably not fatal. That is when the bear focuses its jaws on his left thigh muscle. It bit and tore his thigh muscle, rending huge chunks of tissue and flesh away with each bite. The enraged and wounded bear picked Scott up by his thigh muscle and flipped him upside down while shaking him back and forth. The warm blood gushed from his thigh wounds and ran down his skin inside of his pants. Then the bear dropped him and backed off a few steps. Scott could tell that the bear had begun to feel the deadly effects of the bullets. The attack was only about 30 seconds from when Scott fired the shot from 10 feet away from the bear until it turned away from him. In those 30 seconds, the bear had torn Scott's body up severely and unimaginably. The bear stood just 3 feet from Scott, glaring at him. He tried to close the bolt on his rifle, but could see the firing pin was stuck, preventing him from putting the bear down. Somehow, he still managed to get away. Each time he stepped on his left foot, it would fold up on him, so he hopped along on his left heel until he was a safe distance. Scott sat down and began yelling for help. He then pulled out his handheld radio and reached out to the Coast Guard, telling them he needed a medical helicopter now. He hadn't assessed his thigh wound very much yet, but was concerned that his femoral artery had been damaged or torn and he may bleed to death quickly. It was only a few minutes before Levi and a worker at a nearby lodge were at his side. He was a bloody mess, and it seemed like his blood was leaking from every pore in his body. Scott remained calm and never lost consciousness, while Levi and the worker stabilized him as they waited for the Coast Guard helicopter, which arrived about 90 minutes after the attack. The medical helicopter flew Scott out to the Sitka Community Hospital in Sitka, Alaska. He spent 23 days there and another 60 days recovering from home in Petersburg. The brown bear had left Scott with 32 puncture wounds over his hands, one arm, his left leg, and foot. The following day, Levi and another guide brought Juan back to recover the bear. As they rolled the bear over to skin him, they could see that the bear had died while laying on top of Scott's boot. After reviewing the riveting and chilling facts surrounding this episode, I am left with a few questions. Do you think that this attack could have been avoided with bear spray? Do you think Scott should have left Juan on the beach or brought into the timber as a backup shooter? Do you think it is a good idea to follow a wounded brown bear into a dense patch of timber and brush? Do you think this episode has an eerie similarity to the episode we did on the bow hunter Ronnie Lemming? I will enjoy reading your posts, so please comment in the comment section below, and let's talk about it.
Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks.
Today's episode takes us to a location just a few hundred miles south of our prior episode on Christine Courtney, about 55 miles west of Calgary, Alberta, Canada, to a frequently traveled trail near Canmore. This area is lush pine and fir forests rimmed with giant granite mountain peaks. The mountains in this area run north and south and form a high elevation barrier that draws precipitation to it. The mountaintops are cold enough to cause the clouds to condense enough to release their moisture in the form of rain and snow, which benefits the forest and animals alike. The common animals you will see here are moose, elk, deer, caribou, sheep, and mountain goats. The predators of the area include coyotes, wolves, cougars, as well as black and brown bears. It is in this picturesque and scenic setting that our episode takes place today. Canmore is a small resort-like town with only 13,000 inhabitants. It has a nice golf course called Silvertip with a nice jogging trail around it. It seems like lately there have been a lot of brown bears interacting with people here, and some of those interactions are not very settling. There was a smallish male brown bear who had been frequenting and even stalking people while they were outdoors with their pets or just out for a walk. On a sunny afternoon in early May of 2005, Nikki Davison took her basset hound out for a walk and was planning on taking pictures of some wild flowers near Silvertip Golf Course. Silvertip is named after the hair color grizzlies are known for that makes them appear grizzled. While she had her photo shoot set up, a loud crash came from the trees just above where her and her dog were. They had unwittingly drawn the attention of the previously mentioned young brown bear. As the bear crept down onto the hiking trail, Nikki's mind was filled with terrifying thoughts of nightmares realized. The bear slowly and methodically walked toward Nikki and her dog as she quickly picked up her equipment. Nikki led her dog in a slow retreat from the bear for 10 minutes along the golf course trail. This brown bear was stalking Nikki and her dog. Its head was low and it stared at them as it slowly approached them. She managed to escape the hair-raising encounter and immediately reported the incident to wildlife officials. Wildlife officials showed up and tranquilized the young brown bear. They next affixed a radio tracking collar and relocated the bear to an area inside of nearby Banff National Park, hoping that he would find a niche for himself among local bear populations and forget his fascination with human civilization. For the next week, the bear researchers had watched him as his monitor indicated he was making his way back toward the golf course and what he must have considered his home. He seemed to hang out for a few days in the hills just above town, before making his way back to the Silvertip Golf Course area and the site of the tragedy of our topic today. A female hiker was enjoying her time on the trail on June 5, 2005. She was near the first hole of the Silvertip Golf Course when she was confronted by the same young bear who was relocated. He exhibited the same stalking behaviors and she began to yell in an attempt to frighten him. Her screams alerted a groundskeeper on the golf course. He drove the golf course pickup truck over to the hiker and picked her and her dog up and drove them to safety. Next, he flipped on the golf course irrigation system and doused the bear to encourage him to leave. A little understanding of recent policies is in order. There is an international policy called the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative, which works to codify into environmental policies protected travel corridors, which are supposed to allow wildlife to travel between habitats. The idea behind this is that as wildlife becomes stressed, they might relieve that stress by utilizing a wildlife travel corridor to access a different habitat in which the demands on them may differ. Canmore is just one of many U.S. and Canadian towns located in the middle of the Yellowstone to Yukon corridor. This policy is in conflict with allowing burgeoning towns the development that they are inevitably experiencing. The trail near the Silvertip Golf Course had been closed since April to allow wildlife like cougars and bears to cross into adjacent habitats free of human interference. After frightening the hiker, the young brown bear dashed off into the nearby forest, only to return once things calmed down. Along this same portion of the trail, a small group of friends were jogging. In that group was 36-year-old competitive mountain biker Isabelle Dube. She was the mother of a 5-year-old daughter and an avid fitness practitioner. She worked as a substitute French language teacher after relocating to Canmore from a small town near Quebec City. Isabelle and two of her female jogging partners rounded a bend in the trail, coming face to face with one of their darkest fears. There was the young brown bear standing and facing them in the trail, a mere 20 meters ahead of them. The bear was staring directly at them, with its head low and ears pinned back. As it stared at them, it slowly lumbered toward them with an eerie quietness. It was apparent this bear was interested in approaching the women with clear intentions. The group of joggers slowly backed up as one. They gave ground to the young brown bear as it closed in on them slowly. The women fought the urge to break and run away, knowing this may cause a predatory response from the bear. They made noise, yelled, and slowly gave ground for a considerable distance before realizing this bear was intent on eating them. Isabelle decided she would seek the protection of a tree, so as the ladies gave ground, she started climbing up into its boughs, hoping that the bear wouldn't be able to climb it. The problem is that most brown bears are too big to climb trees very well, but smaller ones can climb trees as well as black bears. As Isabelle grabbed limbs and pulled herself up, higher and higher into the tree, her jogging partners continued to back down the trail and around the bend. As soon as the joggers lost sight of the bear, they broke and ran the 1/4 mile distance to find an attendee at the Silvertip golf course. The last they saw of Isabelle was that she was climbing into the tree and the bear was focused on her as she did so. They knew they had only a limited amount of time and had to hope for the best for Isabelle as they got help. It doesn't take joggers much time to sprint a 1/4 mile or so. As they ran, they could hear Isabelle screaming at the bear. The joggers probably covered the distance in about a minute. Locating someone to help and relaying the information surrounding Isabelle's situation may have taken another minute or so, and responding to the location took at least a few more minutes. This established a very short timeline of at least 3 to 5 minutes, in which the bear somehow climbed the tree Isabelle was sheltering in. It had somehow pulled her out of the tree she was in to the ground below. In that short amount of time, this undersized young brown bear had mauled Isabelle Dube to death before rescuers arrived. One of Isabelle's jogging partners guided an armed Fish and Wildlife officer back to the attack scene. The officer shot and killed the young brown bear with a single bullet as it defended Isabelle's body, clearly claiming it as a food source. A post-mortem analysis on the bear revealed is to be a 4-year-old male weighing in at just under 200 pounds. This is very small for a 4-year-old male brown bear. Isabelle was the first human fatality from bear attack in the province of Alberta since 1998. Isabelle's husband, Heath McCroy, and her 5-year-old daughter, Leah, now had to put their lives back together after burying their beloved wife and mother. If this story ended there, it would be tragic and sad enough, but there is a second part to this story. When her mother died in this bear attack, Leah was 5 years old and already remarkable like her mother. She embraced the same lifestyle centered around fitness and enjoyed running on the Canmore trails. Her father and her established guidelines for trail running. These guidelines included always carrying bear spray and never running alone. Near Canmore, there had been another bear controversy brewing. Bear number 148 had a tag in her ear, meaning at some point she had been tranquilized, tattooed on her lip, and tracked after being captured near Canmore. This is typically done when the bear is involved in a human-centered problem, which could be as minor as getting into a trash bin at night, or as serious as behaving aggressively toward people on trail systems. Now, most grizzly females don't give birth until they are about 5 to 6 years old, and then only have cubs on an average cycle of every 4 years. Bear number 148 was 6.5 years old and had no cubs. Given their lifespan averages about 25 years, this means she will only have about 4 litters of up to 4 cubs in her lifetime. Half of these cubs will die before their first year, so you can see just how precarious their long-term population can be. Leah had decided to go for a jog on the trail systems near Canmore, and this time she made a deviation to the guidelines her and her father had established and practiced for years. She was planning on going jogging by herself today and forgot her bear spray in her car, parked at the lot of the trailhead. As Leah, now 17 years old, jogged down the trail, her mind slipped into that mode that runners use to unfocus their attention. She bounced along the trail for several hundred yards before there was a very frightening crashing sound just off the trail. She rounded a portion of the trail and stood within just a few yards of a very angry bear, number 148. The bear was huffing and popping her jaws at Leah. There was nearly no room between Leah and the angry sow. Right then, rapid thoughts flashed through Leah's mind. She was terrified and immediately thought she would suffer the same fate as her mother. Her and her father had discussed how to be bear-aware, how to back slowly away from a confrontation to bring bear spray and to not look like prey to a predator. Leah's mind went blank when she was face to face with the bear. Not only did she not bring her bear spray, she broke the primary rule when confronted by a bear. She ran away. She states that she recalls thinking how she was not dying today as she bolted from the bear. As she sailed along the trail back toward her parked car and the safety it offered, her mind flashed with fears and thoughts. She considered that this is how her mother felt in her last moments. The fear and terror had to be the same. The contrast in the mother's response and Leah's was glaring to her. Her mother stood her ground and did everything right, but still lost her life. Leah did everything wrong and fled a predator that could easily catch her, but managed to survive without a scratch. After safely returning to her car, Leah reported the incident to Fish and Wildlife officers. Bear number 148 was relocated to Jasper National Park just a few hours north following this incident. She had a tracking collar placed on her so that researchers could monitor her, and she is staying put in her new area. She seems to be fitting in well, very near where she was released. Leah explains that she wants bears to be protected and not be threatened by people. She admits there are territorial bears, and she hopes Bear 148 does well in her new home. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I have a few questions for you. Do you think it is eerie that Isabelle and Leah both had close-range confrontations with brown bears on the same trail system doing the same thing? Do you think that if Isabelle and her jogging partners had run away, that they would have all survived? Do you think that bear spray may have saved Isabelle's life? Are local governments better off hazing bears away from municipalities to prevent conflicts between bears and humans? I look forward to reading your responses, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks.
Today's episode takes us to familiar territory, near Cluane Park, a few hours by car west of Whitehorse, Yukon Territory, Canada. This area borders Alaska and shares the St. Elias Mountains with it. There are about 45,000 visitors who have visited the park each year of its 24-year history at the time of this incident. The park is riddled with glaciers and high rocky mountains. In fact, the highest mountain in Canada, Mount Logan, is here soaring 19,551 feet high above the Beauty. The forests here are comprised of white spruce, balsam poplar, and quaking aspen. Along rivers, streams, and lakes, willow and alder shelter the animals and birds. Common animals here include Yukon wolves, Yukon moose, caribou, lynx, and wolverines. There are also black and brown bears stalking the forests as well. This is the picturesque and wild setting in which our episode takes place. At the Cluane Park office is a brochure that discusses what to do if you are attacked by a bear while enjoying the park. It instructs visitors to play dead by curling up in a ball covering their face, neck, and abdomen. The brochure is titled, "You Are in Bear Country." What the brochure doesn't say is the proper context in which this advice is helpful. On Friday, July 5, 1996, newlyweds Christine Courtney and her husband Paul were enjoying a hike on the Slims Valley Trail. They had just been married a little less than a year prior and were enjoying touring the national parks together. The two lovebirds had traveled up from New Westminster, British Columbia, where Paul was a customs broker by profession. The Kearneys wore bear bells to make sure the bear knew they were there. They had run into a few bears in their travels, and they augmented their direct learning by reading about bears. They were bear-aware, as the saying goes. They didn't pack foods that emanated tempting scents, nor were they wearing perfume or colognes. They packed out what they packed in and avoided close confrontations with bears whenever they encountered them. They knew better than to run away and stimulate the predatory response from a bear. The Courtneys didn't bring bear spray, nor did they bring a large knife with them. Visitors to Canada's national parks and historical monuments are prohibited from carrying firearms. They were about 3 miles into their hike and enjoying their time together, surrounded by scenery that would make Claude Monet jealous. He couldn't paint a landscape as breathtaking and beautiful as what they were hiking through. With their packs across their backs, they noticed down the trail about 50 yards or so, a rather smallish brown bear heading directly toward them. It looked to be about the size of a St. Bernard dog and had its head low, as if it was smelling a scent trail. It seemed oblivious to the hikers, so they decided to give it a wide berth and left the trail by about 35 yards or so. That is when the bear obviously noticed them, and it left the trail in a direct line toward them. The Courtneys decided to shed their backpacks as a distraction and move off a little farther. Their food was properly stored in the bear-proof containers, so the bear didn't smell anything interesting there, and wandered right past the backpacks toward the hikers. The Courtneys were now growing very uneasy as this bear took far too much interest in them to be comfortable. They continued back up and entered a clearing, hoping that seeing the people in the open would bring the bear to its senses, and it would recognize them as not its typical food. As the bear continued to approach them, they decided to follow the advice on the brochure back at the park office. They sat down and curled into a ball, protecting their faces, necks, and stomachs. The playing dead routine was in full effect by the time the bear ambled up to the couple. The brown bear initially sniffed at Paul, but then began to be uncomfortably interested in Christine. It sniffed her over very thoroughly and immediately began to paw and bite her. Once the bear began to bite Christine, she couldn't help but react. She screamed out in terror and pain. This caused Paul to come to her defense. Paul picked up a stick and beat the bear about the head. He then began to punch the bear and try to drive it off his wife. He repeatedly struck the bear, but it simply turned toward him and raked him with its claws. It then bit him on the leg. Paul was unsure what to do next and ran a short distance to hide behind a tree. As soon as it had run Paul off, it redirected its attention back to Christine. Paul was justifiably scared, but seeing his wife being attacked, immediately returned to punch and kick the bear again. With every punch he threw, the bear's intentions did not waver. It never took its focus off of its attack on Christine. Christine managed to tell Paul that his efforts to save her were doing no good, as the bear had its mind set. Realizing the danger and futility of the situation, Paul knew he would need help. He decided to run to the Sheep Mountain Visitor Center back at the head of the trail. He ran the first 4 miles, and a car drove him the last 2 miles. He alerted the authorities of his wife's plight, and an armed rescue helicopter was in the air within minutes and headed to the location. As the copter approached the area, they located the clearing Paul had indicated the attack occurred in. On the ground, they could see the bear standing over Christine's motionless body and took careful aim to dispatch the man-killer. The bear slumped over and off of Christine's body, but it was far too late. Christine was dead. A recovery team brought Christine's remains back home for mourning and a memorial of her life. The authorities conducted a necropsy on the bear and found it to be a male about 135 centimeters tall, and it weighed only about 130 pounds. It had no obvious disease and was not protecting a kill it had cached nearby. They had no reason that this bear attack had happened, using the known and typical causes of such events. In the bear's stomach they found some vegetation and bits of Christine's clothing. Mr. Courtney doesn't blame the bear for his wife's death. He states that bears are unpredictable by nature. He also doesn't blame the park for the bear's obviously predatory behavior. He is still tormented by the sights and sounds he experienced while witnessing his wife's death. He rejects the notion that killing more bears would reduce or eliminate extremely rare predatory attacks, like the one that took Christine's life. Authorities' hindsight is anything but useful, but they say the Courtneys should have left their backpacks on to look larger. They should have stood their ground and made a lot of noise. They also note that playing dead in a predatory attack can be a fatal mistake, contrary to the brochure on the park office counter. Authorities say there are about 100 to 150 brown bears in the park, but it isn't clear how they arrive at this number. There are no plans indicating the necessity of reducing bear numbers in the park at this time. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, some questions have come to mind. Do you think the Courtneys were not as afraid of this bear due to his small size? At what point do you think you would have taken defensive action against the bear? What problems may arise if visitors were allowed to carry firearms in the park? Do you think bear spray would have changed the outcome of this attack? I appreciate your comments and will enjoy reading, so post your thoughts below in the comments section and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.